All right, cool. So welcome back, everybody. This is week 2. Last week was pretty light, just getting introduced to the theory. This week, we're going to really start digging into a bunch of models. So I have pulled together like 9 different models for us to play with. And I'll talk about why we're going to play with those or what we're going to do. But in most part, like I think one of the things we talked about a little bit last week is like, over the past 2 years, there've been so many of these different models that have sort of been made and created, and some of them fell to the wayside. Some of them were hot for a week or a month, and now have sort of been forgotten about by the community. And I think it's kind of a nice thing to just spend maybe this week to go back and sort of look at some older models or look at some different tools and sort of see what maybe got left behind that is still really interesting or could be worth playing with. So that's sort of what we're going to do today. We're also going to look at just sort of a bunch of different interfaces. So we'll look at a couple different, mostly like some of the free tools or free-ish tools, freemium tools. So look at Huggingface, Spaces, Replicate, and then obviously we'll dig into some Colab stuff in the second half of class. So I'm going to share slides. There aren't a lot of slides today because it's really just we're going to dig into a bunch of these tools. But if anyone wants them or wants to follow along, have at it. Drop this in the chat for everybody. Thanks, Nat. That's cool. I'll double check. I'll definitely look at that this week, since next week we're going to be talking about prompts. And then I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oh, okay. I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do before we jump into everything. So just a reminder, this is where we are this week. So we'll be mostly looking at different models. And like I said, we'll look at some of the free interfaces that are out there. It's also kind of a nice thing, I think, especially with like Huggingface Spaces, it's kind of become a de facto like second place for people to put their models. So you can always go through there and kind of try out some of the models before you really dig into them. We'll be doing prompting next week, which is obviously gonna be really, really important for this. So this week I'll just be kind of playing around, but you might next week come back and use some of the prompting learnings that we've done to come back and play with these models again. So just keep that in mind. And then we'll get much further along as we get further into weeks. One note is I unfortunately have to travel at this time next week. It was a little bit of a new like last minute add to my schedule. I think that's fine. We've got a couple options that I've done in the past. So one is if we want to just record the lecture, I can do that, and then we can have follow-up Q&A time either over Slack or through another channel. I can do the lecture on a different day. I kind of have Thursdays set out as like a secondary option for us. We could also push it back a week. So if we want to sort of like just say we'll skip next week, we do have some wiggle room because I've got that Monday before Thanksgiving available, or we can even push out an extra week. So what I will do is I'll post in our Slack channel just maybe like a poll and just sort of see what people are feeling like would be most flexible for them in their schedule. Regardless, I'll make sure that everyone is feeling comfortable with that idea, even if it's like we push back a week, but I record something for people. Like I want to be flexible since this is kind of my screw up around our schedule. But we definitely won't have class live next week at this time. Because I'll be on an Acela and I will doubtfully not have like very good Wi-Fi to be able to teach during that time. So just a heads up there, but we'll figure out something to make sure that people get the material one way or another. Also, I want to say we're going to start office hours this week. So office hours, for those of you who are new to my classes, are generally just like time for you to drop in and ask questions. So maybe you found a model that you don't know how to use and you're just sort of interested in it and you want to show up and ask and have me walk through it with you. Otherwise, maybe you just want to hear what other people are working on or hear other people's questions. You're welcome to join and just not ask anything. Usually we have a couple of people every week that sort of stop in. Maybe they've got a project they're working on and they just need a little bit of help with it. It's sort of open hours, so you can sort of roll in whenever. I would say if you're not going to show up exactly at 7:30, if you just wouldn't mind just slacking me and giving me a heads up. That way I'm not hanging around for the full hour and no one shows up. What I'll also do is sort of the day of on Thursday, I'll post in the Slack channel, just saying we've got office hours today, and people will like respond with an emoji of whether or not they're going to show up. So if you do plan on showing up, like please let me know. It's okay if things change last minute. I totally get that. But that way I just know like if no one's going to show up, then I won't like hang out on Zoom for an hour. I might just like, go do something else, but have Slack open in case someone wants to drop in. Sound good? Cool. Okay. So now I'm going to get into what we're going to talk about today, which is obviously we'll go through some GUI tools. I think it's helpful to think about these GUI tools as, again, there's so many new models coming out all the time. what of them do you invest in? What of them do you not? Like, so I think some of these tools are helpful to just get up and running and started without having to invest in like Colab and learning the setup and all that process. So we'll start there, just a way to sort of explore some different materials. And then we'll spend maybe the second half of class really going through Colab. There's a couple of Colab notebooks that I think are really good, particularly in their Colab version. And then at the very end, in order to prep for the sort of the next couple weeks, I want us to go through using the web GUI tool, which is running Colab, but once we're done like with the first setup of it, we just move over to a web browser, which is kind of nice. So that'll probably be the tool that we use for most of this class, because especially as you get into further sections, there's lots of really interesting tools available to us through these GUIs. Yeah, so with that, we'll get started. So just a reminder, like the whole process for this is going to be, we're going to use this clip model and then some image generator. And what we're going to look at today are what the image generators are. So look at a bunch of different variations on an image generator. And all of them will generally have the same process. They'll be able to set a text prompt, and you might be able to set steps. Some of them get a little bit more complicated than that, some get less complicated than that. They might just take purely a text prompt. But it's important to just remember, like the main thing that we really want to focus on here is obviously a text prompt, but then also like seeing what other settings are available, because some of the settings will vary depending on what interface you're using, or even on what model you're using. So we'll start with online GUIs. This has kind of been an emerging space, and one I think that is sort of interesting to see. Ideally, most of us wouldn't have to use Colab because, really they're just a little GUI, right? There's a text prompt, maybe some sliders, that sort of thing. Colab's a little like powerful, or maybe the interface isn't particularly well designed for that. So some of these places are popping up where they offer free GPUs behind the scenes, but you can still use these tools and sort of play with them a little bit. I think the most popular one right now is Huggingface Spaces. It's just kind of funny because for those of you that remember the early days of Runway were essentially that, right? They had lists like all these models, and then you could go ahead and play with stuff in the models and pay them a couple cents per run. They moved away from that into more of the video space. And now I find that like in the past month or two, they're moving back to that. So it's kind of an interesting moment where we're seeing lots of people move back to these sort of like online models where the GPU is hosted, and you maybe have to pay them a little bit of money per run, but so much the other guesswork is taken away. So these particular two like are free-ish. The other one we'll look at is Replicate. I've yet to have to pay for these, but other people have told me if you run this like, I don't know, 10, 15, 25, 50 times, at some point they stop you and make you pay. I've personally yet to run into that, maybe because I just use these as one-offs and then I move on to Colab if I'm really interested in it. So the nice thing is these are kind of free. I guess maybe if you're really going crazy with them, you might eventually paywall you. I know the Hugging Face Spaces, I think their pro account is like $9 a month. I've yet to see what Replicate charges. I would assume something similar. But so these are generally free. Unlike, the reason I'm not including Dolly here is obviously Dolly is its own tool, and they have their own payment system. I'm not including Midjourney here because I think Midjourney gives you like 10 tokens before you have to pay them. But if anyone wants to experiment with those tools, like let me know, and I'm happy to like just record a demo of them for people who are interested. But for now, I think we'll focus on these, in part because there's also sort of like a model zoo with all of these that we'll look at in a minute, which means you can find lots of new models there, or just like type for a search and maybe something pops up. I also find the control and setup for these is really straightforward, which is really nice. The downside of these is, especially with Hugging Face Spaces, I'm not sure what's going on right now. They've like disabled all of the advanced controls, which is kind of frustrating. But Replicate, we can sort of see some of the options there as well. So they are often lacking in controls, which is where Colab would be really, really powerful. But again, this is like a nice sort of like, if you want to dip in and try a model and see if you like the results, or see if you like the look and feel of it, then it might be a good place to start. So with that, we'll go ahead and just check out some of these. So I pulled out a couple of these that I think are kind of interesting. These are ones that are not super popular these days, although maybe at one point they were. Also, I think that some of them are using internationalization, or like were developed by non-Western English speaking companies. So there's some interesting opportunities to play with new models there. So we'll just go through, I'll drop these in a chat for us. We'll just go through these one by one and sort of play with them. What I might recommend for today is pick a single prompt and use that single prompt across all of these models and just sort of compare the two that way. Because I think that's going to be helpful for you to sort of see the differences between them. I've definitely noticed that with some of these, certain prompts just don't work very well. And we'll talk about that more next week. But in other ones, the prompts work really well in these tools. So we'll go through them one by one and sort of see how we feel. So we'll start with Hypertron. Hypertron is the name for one of these VQGAN models. I would say about a year ago, VQGAN was sort of the hot model that everyone was using. But today it's probably like definitely been usurped by the diffusion models. And as you can imagine, VQGAN, because it has the GAN in the name, is a GAN. So it generates images using that way. So first off, when you find one of these tools, make sure you're in a space. There is a way to actually be in just like the model itself. So if you were to actually search up here, you go VQGAN. There are models, there's data sets, and there's spaces. Spaces is what we want to play with because that's actually how you can demo a tool. These other ones are more like if you want to download their models and be able to begin to use them in your own tools, you can do that. So just make sure that when the URL, it says spaces, because that's how you know you can actually fit things. From here, you can basically just go in and play with this. Like there's, you'll see here, it says running on T4. So this will tell you how the model or the GPU it's running on. This is obviously a slow GPU, but that's fine for this. It just means it might take us a couple more minutes. So coming in here, I see my options are a prompt. So, again, you sort of read through these and say, try adding increments to your prompts, such as oil on canvas, a painting, or a book cover. So I've been working with this prompt for a couple months now, just as like a demo prompt. I'm going to use this. So a beautiful painting of a dog on a dolphin in the ocean. You can feel free to use whatever you want. I find there's something interesting about this particular prompt because some models really struggle with putting a dog on a dolphin or using a dog and a dolphin together. So this kind of helps me understand like what's the level of like complexity that this model can handle. Next, we can set width and height. So by default, it's generally a good idea to start with square model sizes. These models are all trained at square sizes, and therefore you'll get the most sort of like coherence if you keep it to square. So if you were to say, make the width, say 512, oh, interesting, why is it, okay. If you were to say, make the width 512, you would double the width. The challenge is the way these models really work is they really generate on squares. So you're likely to get sort of some like body horror stuff going on if you make the width double wide. So what I would say is always start with like just a square image and then see what you get. And then you can sort of play from there up to a different width. This particular model also has a bunch of styles, which I feel like at one point I knew what they meant and now I sort of don't. So usually I would just set this to default. And then there's this flavor model, which again, I feel like there was something about like how the flavors work. I'll have to dig this up. This is now getting a little old. I'm definitely like showing what I've forgotten. But you can go in here and pick some of these. And also because this only takes a couple minutes to generate, play with them, set different ones and see what you get. So we'll try Zinth, just see what that looks like. At this point, I can go ahead and just hit submit. And with Huggingface spaces, there's always this little counter here at the top that tells you how long it takes to generate. I think this is helpful because it's not always like accurate. It's not like every run is going to be the exact same amount of time, but it is helpful just to get a sense of how long they run for. So my guess is VQGAN in this case only took 18 seconds, probably because I have the size pretty small. The bigger the size is and the more steps you have. So actually here you can see I screwed up. It says more steps, all styles that are not hyper fast, which is this setting, need at least 20 steps. So let's crank up our steps. So my guess is this should be a 50 seconds or 50 steps took 18 seconds. It should take 4 times as long. But it says I need that in order to generate a good image. So let's just see. So you also see probably some of you are running this model as well. And you'll see here it actually says 2 people are ahead of you. So there's an ETA of about 2 minutes before this runs. So while this is running, let's talk a little bit more about Huggingface spaces. As I showed, there's like a really nice interface here where you can Google stuff. So let's say, hey, I know Stable Diffusion exists. So let me just type this in here and see what models are available. So you'll see there's models available, and then there's also spaces available. You'll see 89 space results for Stable Diffusion. Let's just go ahead and click that. And you'll see, wow, there's a lot of Stable Diffusion models here. And you might say, well, which one of these should I pick? And I would argue you might want to look at who made them. So at the bottom here is who made them. So my guess is, Huggingface projects is kind of an interesting one because that might be an official Huggingface team. Runway ML, so like that's probably an official runway tool. Gradio is another one that it means it's like a big company. I'm pretty sure there's also like a Stability AI version. Yeah, so Stability AI are the folks that made Stable Diffusion. So obviously, like those might be where I would start, just because those are sort of the quote unquote official ones. But if you look at the names, you're sort of like, oh, interesting. Maybe there's a video based one. So let me try that. The other thing to keep an eye on is you'll see here that they do have some runtime errors or build errors. If you get one with a build error, that generally means that they broke something or like it's not working, in which case it probably won't work for you either. So just be aware of that. Like a lot of these models are building errors, and that means you might not be able to use them. So in that case, you might want to just avoid those and come back to them, and maybe check tomorrow and see if they're now working. See if our model generated. Cool. So my model did generate. Okay, so you can see here, like this is not a particularly good image of a beautiful painting of a dog on a dolphin in the ocean. You get this sort of like dolphin-y shape that maybe has dog textures in it, or I guess maybe because I asked for a beautiful painting, it's giving me this like very beautiful cloth effect. Again, because these models are trained on so many different phrases, often a beautiful painting will introduce other artifacts because everything is labeled as a beautiful painting, usually like, still lifes or floral paintings or other things. So just be aware of that. But I do think VQGAN is still really interesting in that it generally is still very abstract because of its age. It's not the best for realism, but I think it generally produces this very interesting sort of like abstract sort of artifacting and that sort of thing. So if you're really interested in abstraction tools, I actually think VQGAN is still something worth playing with and sort of seeing where you go. Any questions about this one? I'm just going to run through these rapid fire, but if I can stop and answer questions if anyone has any.
Okay.
Matt, are you saying something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I tried to do the spacebar trick, but it didn't work fast enough. Just a quick question about when your figures are getting cut off. Let's say you selected 512 by 12, but the figure that you're creating the prompt for is getting cut off, and you're just getting part of the body and no head. What prompt would you do? Like full body? Would that actually work if you added a full, something like that?
Yeah, you would definitely want to change the prompt to see if you get something like full body, or maybe you just want the head and you want to say just portrait or something.
Portrait.
Okay. Yeah, full body would probably be a good place to start, or waist up or that sort of thing. Definitely, like I would have to admit, like some of the portrait body stuff is not necessarily my cup of, or my forte. So like we might have to look around and sort of see for the best prompts for that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And usually those bodies are cropped because, again, they've been trained on data where they crop the data to squares and then, they crop off heads and that sort of thing. So that's one of the challenges of a lot of these tools. So again, the nice thing about Hugging Face is also like, you don't need to turn off the model or anything. You just leave the page and it sort of like learns everything. So some kind of nice, bonuses of using this tool. One thing I will mention is if you aren't going through the demos, or if you are going through the demos, you've got a little bit of time. Later in the class, we're going to use Hugging Face to actually get access to our models. So go ahead and create an account while you're here. Like here, I think if I just sign out, I can show you. So just go sign up and create an account with them. They don't charge you any money for that, but we do need to get access to the Stable Diffusion models when we start to use it in our web GUI. So go ahead and just create an account while you're here. And they're a pretty good company. I don't think like giving them your info is too dangerous. They're fairly well established at this point. You can also like and save models. So let's say you find a model you really like, which clearly I've done here. There's the like button. And the kind of nice thing about that is it adds it then to your desktop or your home space, your dashboard. And you'll also see along the side here that there are a number of trending models. I actually think we're going to look at a couple of these. We're going to definitely look at Clip Interrogator next week. Yeah. So there's lots of cool little tools here. So it's also helpful to sort of see what other people are using. Like I might check out what Stable Diffusion prompts is, since we're going to talk all about prompts next week. Okay, Bug, I need you to shut up, okay? Come on. Oh my God. Okay. Well, let's dig into another Huggingface space. So this one just came out a couple days ago. It's called Ernie VILG. Drop this in the chat for everybody. Mackenzie, yes, you asked. Huggingface is sort of like multi-use. It is also used as a repository. So they do host models, and you do have to download some of them. So like the DForum, we'll actually do that later today. We'll want to download Stable Diffusion 1.5. And in order to do that, you need to give Huggingface access or like a token in order to do that. We'll go through that process later today. But yeah, Huggingface is kind of like branching out into lots of different spaces, no pun intended or no confusion there, but moving into lots of different things. And one of them is they do whole weights for you. All right, let's check out Ernie VILG. The reason I wanted to bring this one up is, first off, this is a brand new version of the model. The first version of this model came out maybe a couple months ago. The other thing that's interesting about this is a Chinese company. So this is really actually built around the Chinese language, which I think is kind of interesting. And I think there's a lot of these models that are like, there's some Russian models as well that are coming out. And for us, like, being English speaking, they do have translation options. But regardless, there's sort of that interesting idea of like conceptually ideas don't always translate the right way. But I think there's something really interesting about this tool. So Ernie VILG is, very simpler. Like it's just a prompt setting. So let's try this again. So let's do, I should really just have this in a text phrase so I can just copy and paste it. A beautiful painting of a dog on a dolphin in the ocean. I'll spell things correctly. So this is going to translate it, I believe, into Chinese, then run the model on the Chinese translation. So who knows what we're going to actually really get with that translation. The other thing is there are some nice style options here. So you'll see that there's Lolita style. Okay, oil painting, watercolor, cartoon, anime, ukiyo-e, vaporwave. They've added a bunch of these recently. I think before it was just these. So let's say because I'm doing a painting, I want to set this to oil painting. So the nice thing about this is because they have sort of these classified styles, you can actually get some pretty like good stylistic results by just using this and not having to implement that into your text prompts. There's also, this is default 1024 by 1024. The resolution is really important to you. This is a good one to look at. They also have some options for rectangles as well. So I believe that's all the options here. There are more stuff here, but it's in Chinese, so I don't know what a lot of it means. The first version of this model had no English translations. So when I was trying to use it, I had to use like Google Translate to try and figure out what I was doing. It still made really interesting images. I think there's some really cool, like realistic images being made out of this thing. Let's go ahead and click generate image. So this is obviously sort of like a Chinese competitor to DALL-E. Paddle is one of the big machine learning companies in China. The paper for this one's actually quite interesting. It uses a lot of the same techniques that DALL-E and image gen and other things do, but it also adds, I believe, like sort of a classifier on top of it and an object detection scenario where it tries to like sort of purposely like change composition based on what it sees. So I think there's some interesting stuff in this one that we might see come to other models soon as well. And already we're over our estimated time. It's probably because all of us are using the model all at the same time. And folks were asking me last week how I find all these new models. The best person to follow is it underscore AK? Yes, there we go. Is this person. So literally, I found this model through them. I'll post this link in here for people. The upside of this person is they post pretty much every single image generating paper you can imagine. The downside is they post literally every single paper they find. So it is a lot of noise over signal. But usually what I look for is I try to look for if they have demos, right? So if I see something like a demo and it's a Huggingface space, that means I can go open it and play with it like very quickly. So, it used to be I looked for Colab notebooks and then that got, kind of annoying. So now I look for a Huggingface space or a replicate demo. Okay, so here are all my models or my images. So this output 6 images. And you'll see here, like one of the things I always try with this particular tool is, does it understand a dog on a dolphin or does it just understand dogs and dolphins? With a lot of the new models, I'm finding that it doesn't understand dog on dolphin. It understands dog and it understands dolphin. So it tries to generate both in different places, but it doesn't really necessarily understand like conceptually like placement of things. So I've noticed that with a lot of these new models is that they're not really good at that.
Oh, one other thing is the structure of Chinese sentence structures is different from English. So that might also make a difference. So depending on where certain things are when you're lining up the words in a sentence, that might make a difference as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is order. We'll talk about this more next week, but order matters a lot too, right? So what you might want to do is front load the objects you want, and then at the end sort of add in styles and that sort of thing. So something like this might actually be better for some of these models than other things. So I might run this again just to sort of see the difference. What I also think is kind of funny here is like, look at this one. This one is clearly like a dog face with like dolphin ears as it's like, floppy ears. It's like a dolphin texture. So again, like each one of these models is going to generate like different things. And I think that's sort of what's fun about them, but also what can be kind of challenging. So you're like, oh, which model do I start with or what model do I use? But I find that, each of these model variations has a different sort of look and feel to it. And this thing, to your point, Nat, like this one's kind of interesting because it is translating to Chinese, which means we don't necessarily know the exact structure that we're getting out of this or exactly how the translation works, right? Like, it's not always dog, like I'm sure dog is fairly consistent or maybe dolphin is fairly consistent, but when you start getting using other phrases, there might be like a mistranslation or a slight change in meaning as it goes through it. Oh, so I like that one. All right, so that is Huggingface. That is, yeah, go for it.
So when you talk about how you try to look at these different models and see if it understands like placement of the dog on the dolphin, or whether it's like this, where it's like just like recognizing dolphins or dogs, like, is it because of the specific data set that it's trained on, or like, are there other factors that like lead to some doing better, like performing better with like your original like vision?
Yeah, it's probably a mix of things. It's probably one, what is the data set? Was the data set trained on, and what were its captions during that training, right? Not every caption is also like location based or position based. Similarly, like some of these are no longer using clip, and some of them are using their own trained text to image scoring system. And again, those also might be biased toward another thing. And again, I can't speak for Chinese, but maybe even Chinese as a language does not utilize positions in the same way that we think it does. Maybe other languages might also have similar issues with that, right? So like, it's so many different things that can go into these things. And I just sort of approach it more of like, what can I see that's working here or what isn't? So for example, I bet for this one, what's kind of nice here is I've got all these different styles, that maybe allow me to sort of like really fine tune style without having to figure out all these text prompts. So each of these models have some pros and some cons, and it's kind of about weighing what works and what doesn't.
Cool.
Oh, one more thing. I wonder if we did an experiment and instead of writing the sentence the way you did, if you wrote dog on top dolphin,
Yep.
in ocean. A dog. Get rid of a dog and just say dog on top.
Yep.
Let's see, dog on top. Get rid of the comma, maybe also. Let's see, dog on top, dolphin in ocean. And then get rid of the beautiful painting. Or just, sorry, not, you could just say beautiful painting, maybe.
Yep.
Okay, well, try it like this. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, let's try it. I mean, this is basically like, this is the work of doing these models, right? It's just like playing with phrasing and seeing what you get. So we'll go ahead and we'll run this in the background. I also think, I don't think Huggingface cares if you run multiple models at once. So while that one runs, we know it might take a little bit of time. Oh my God, and I also have so many tabs here. Downside of classes like this, where I just constantly open up new tabs. So while we do this, let's open up our RU Dolly. So as I mentioned, there are lots of these models coming out with from different languages. RU Dolly is the Russian equivalent of Dolly. So it's made by a Russian group. Some of these take a little bit of time to load. Okay, cool. So we're just going to grab this exact phrase that Nat and I just worked on together, and we're going to drop this in. And we're going to keep this a square. You'll see here that this particular version has slightly different settings, right? So like this one, you can't set the actual height and width. You just say square, horizontal, or vertical, and you sort of hope that that gives you a good resolution. I would assume this one is 256 by 256, but I could be wrong. Let's see. So, and then this one has also some modes, right? There's realism, and emoji. Let's do realism. Let's see how real we can get here. And we can go ahead and hit run. Okay, interesting. So while that runs, nice thing is you can kind of pop between these as they run behind the scenes. So this one with our new phrasing does kind of give us some slightly better positional pieces. The funny thing is here, you'll see that our dog now has a dolphin tail. And this dolphin has a dog texture on it. Yeah, so, again, like also because we're only getting 6 random images at a time, if I ran this 10 times to generate 60 images, I might get one that actually gives me the right composition, right? And if I like that composition and the texture, then that's my keeper. That's my cherry picked one, right? And that's the challenge with some of these tools is like, someone will post a really great image. You're like, how did they get that? And you might not know that they generated 500 different results and they only got one really good one. And that's when they posted, right? So that's kind of the challenge with these tools is like, okay, if this is heading in the right direction, do I spend another hour generating multiple versions of them? Or do I find a different tool, right? It's kind of the balance of all these things. Okay, our RU Dolly tool is still running. Funny thing is, this is running on an 810. It should be a lot faster than this. Well, okay, who knows? Maybe RU Dolly just takes a long time to run. Also, you should note here, if this is not written in Russian, it'll be automatically translated to Russian. So here again, this is a auto-translated model. So I do not know anything about Russian, same way I don't know anything about Chinese. So it is being translated into something, and maybe my sentence structure is messed up. Who knows? And here is my image. And I've got like some blobby looking stuff in the middle that just like rocks. Is that because I asked for a dog on top dolphin? Is it because I would say I didn't get a beautiful painting at all? Oh, thanks, Mahal. Let's try this. All right, let's try this. Let's see if this version is.
Yeah, change it from realism though to.
Hold on, I have a mistake in one word.
Okay. I'll wait for you to
it.
update that. What should I switch it to, Nat?
Oh, it was just set to realism, so I just said switch it to something else. Yeah.
Yeah, let's try surrealism and see if that gives us a different result. Also, because it's, I mean, the phrase itself, dog on top of a dolphin, is probably more surreal than it would be realistic, right? So like, that's the other challenge with some of these things. When you ask for realism, you might say, I've never seen a photo or a photorealistic image that actually has a dog on a dolphin. So I'm going to struggle to generate that. Whereas surrealism might give us a better result. Should I run this one or should I wait?
Give me 1 second. I just missing a word because I'm using my keyboard and it's
Okay, perfect.
it's
Okay.
English. This one.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, let's try it, see what happens.
Try Ukrainian, see what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, some of the legal issues around these models, if you put it in the Ukrainian, they're going to block you. I think this model came out before the war started, so I don't know that we're going to have that issue, but who knows?
That's my logic right now when I have to do something in Russian. I started calculating when was it done, and who did it, and who they support. It's never ending.
Yep.
So cool.
Yep. All right, this might take a minute, so let's go ahead and look in. And so I did also link, I wanted to do some older models. I want to do some of the models like from the very early days of the clip craze. The challenge is most of them don't work anymore. So I found someone had put in here Big GAN text to image, which was a model that I think Ryan Murdoch had worked on. I'm gonna have to hit up Ryan and see if he's got a Colab notebook that works these days. But I found this and I was really excited. I was like, finally, I'm gonna find the one that works. And then you'll see here, I got a build error. So unfortunately, some of these tools just do not work. I might go back and try to find some old Colab notebooks and see if I can rewrite them. I just didn't have time this weekend to sort of like mess with like all the various settings and things that you usually have to redo every time these notebooks go out of date. So unfortunately, some of these tools are probably gone to the, like, you know, the models have been lost, or the particular like settings we needed and dependencies we needed might no longer be possible to run through Colab or other things. So it's kind of we're already a year out and we're already losing things. So that's kind of unfortunate. Okay, so here's what I got with, oh, interesting. Here's what I got with my surrealist take. So I definitely see a dolphin, some abstract, very definitely surreal, like futurist dolphin. And I don't know what this would be at the bottom, a kayak, something like that. So we lost our dog, but we did get an interesting sort of, you know, image out of this. So again, if I weren't doing a million different demos with us today, okay, I think we'll be okay. But yeah, so I might sit here and just like try to generate, and because this only generates one image at a time, it can be a little bit harder to sort of see if this is just a bad image or if all the images are going to sort of turn out like this. So, you know, I might go and actually generate maybe a handful of these, right? I would just hit submit multiple times. I might also try to see if there's a Colab notebook for this. Because I know with a Colab notebook, I might be able to sort of set up a loop and just sort of loop generate, you know, 50 of them, save them to Drive, turn off the machine, and then go through Drive and look at them. So the downside of these tools is like, I can't really automate like generating a ton of these, but it sort of gives me a nice little taste of like what I might expect. Maybe this is kind of the craziness I'm looking for, right? I want something that feels more abstract and really more like, this definitely has like a futurist look where like you're seeing a dolphin move through space in every sort of like point in time. So we can always sort of like play with these and see, you know, what's what. So what I would definitely encourage you this week is like either come back to some of these models or find some new ones and just really dig in and investigate like sort of what's going on, what's working, what's not. All right, so let's move over to Replicate. So Replicate is actually very similar. It's just a different company. One of the things I like about Replicate is it seems like the GUI is a little bit more flexible. So I've seen that like they have a little bit more settings available in their tools. So we'll look at two of these. Maybe we'll search and see if there's other ones as well. So we'll start with Pixray. Pixray was super popular, again, probably 6 months, 9 months ago. And it's fallen a little out of favor, but I actually still think the results are really good. And I saw the guy who runs Pixray is Tom White. I actually saw that he updated this 3 days ago, this particular repo. So that's a good sign. I would say also if you find models that are like, yeah, so he pushed these updates 4 days, 1 hour ago. So if you find ones that have been updated in the past week, past month, that's also a good sign they're going to run. And who knows if it's because they've got new tools in there or if it's just because they're keeping it up to date for the various technologies and dependencies needed. So I'll drop this one in the chat for us. Oops. There you go. So Replicate, I think, again, I've heard that sort of like if you run this too many times, they will force you to log in and maybe start charging you. Let's see what the pricing is like for Replicate. Okay, but after a bit, that's vague. You'll be asked to enter your credit card. You pay by the second for the predictions you run, and then you can set your GPU. So it looks like, you know, this is how many seconds. So obviously, if you're generating a big image, it's going to be a little bit more costly or have lots of steps, or just running old code. Then you will be sort of at this price point. And if you run it on an A100, which is a little bit faster, it will be a little better, but that is a not cheap price. 13, 14 cents a minute is a lot of money. Again, this is maybe where you would want to move to Colab if you found that you were like hitting these walls. Let's go ahead and check out Pixray. So Pixray, again, we've got our prompt here. And I, of course, already lost my prompt because I was copy and pasting other things. Dog on top, dolphin in the ocean. Beautiful painting. Let's change this to dolphin. Pixray has these qualities, which this is generally like how many steps does it run? So they're kind of obfuscating away steps and just sort of saying like, do you want a rough draft? Do you want a normal draft? Do you want better or best? Best would obviously like take the longest to run. I don't really want to sit here for a couple minutes. Let's set it to maybe normal. Knowing that we might not get the best image, but at least give us an idea what the composition is. And then here we've got aspect of widescreen or square. Let's just set the square. And you will see that there are no other options here. So I can't even set like sort of like the exact steps. We'll hit submit. And I kind of recall this one takes a good couple minutes to run. So while this is starting in the background, why don't we open up the pixel art version? So Pixray also has a pixel art version. So the idea here is that this particular model has been trained on pixel art images. So if you want that sort of pixel art look, then you really do want to use a model that's been particularly trained on pixel art. So just copy this over. And it looked like it was also adding in pixel art as in the phrase. I think the idea might be that this is also going to help conditioning it to move toward pixel art. So we can leave that in as well. Do square. And it looks like there are a couple different models options here, which is interesting. So I'll leave it at pixel because I do want to generate pixels here. But it looks like there's VQGAN, which would probably be the other version we just looked at. There's line sketch. So if you want something that's lined, and then clip draw. I think clip draw is actually, Tom has this really cool library of stuff where it throws objects on a screen until it like, and then shuffles them around until it draws what is sort of being described. So that might be what that one is. We can play with that later and find out. So let's hit submit here. So this one is now running a prediction, and you'll see it's outputting. Yeah, so here we go. So this is now, so we're starting with noise. So this particular model actually does show us all the iterations. So we're seeing our noise, and now we're seeing other things come out. Why is it not square? Maybe there's more hidden behind this image. Let's see. We'll wait until this finishes running. What I like about this one is it does actually give you the output log as well. Maybe in most cases you don't need that, but I find it sort of helpful for me to sort of see, just in case I see something that looks a little bit off. It's helpful to sort of know about that. You'll see each one of these iterations is pretty slow. One of the reasons people move to diffusion models is they're a lot faster than VQGAN. VQGAN is super slow. That's one of the big downsides of VQGAN is it takes a lot of time to process these images. Let's see how our pixel art one is doing. Running the prediction. So again, this one's pretty slow. Just like Huggingface, there's also a search option here. So you can go to just replicate. And I believe in explore models, you can just hit explore. You'll see there's a bunch of sort of models at the top here. Looks like there are image to text models as collections, which is kind of cool. Yeah, this is kind of nice. I actually like that they have some categories here because it helps search a little bit easier. So we're going to look at all the image text models that are available. Go through here. Oh, there's only 6. Definitely should be more. Models that generate text prompts and captions from images. Oh, interesting. Okay, this is the reverse of text to image. So this would actually be helpful. Maybe we'll look at some of this next week, where this is actually, you can input an image and then you get out a text prompt that you might want to use on that. So there's some helpful tools here as well. Text to image, this is what we want to look at. So Stable Diffusion is here. There's some Pixray, generate a logo using text. There's a bunch of different tools here. And again, this is always sort of helpful. This is nice that you can just sort of start somewhere and sort of see what happens with these tools. And maybe you can find a Colab version that allows you to do other things with it. One thing I noticed here is they've got the deform tools. Where was that? Deform. So deform, we'll look at deform when we get to animation, because deform tools are typically set up for animation. But you might want to play with it now without having to dig into Colab. Oh, Cog videos on here. That's cool. Yeah, so there's some nice stuff on here. And I think there's a different set of models than we're on Hugging Face. So it might be helpful to sort of go through these and just sort of see what's there. Okay, so our image finally outputted. And it looks like this is my dog on top, dolphin in the ocean, beautiful painting, which I have to say, not exactly the best looking image. That may be, again, because of, I said, the quality to normal. In my experience, this is sort of what VQGAN images look like. They always have this very abstract quality to them. That's in part because VQGAN, I mean, in general, GANs are maybe not the best image generators for really diverse data sets. That's why diffusion models have become kind of the winners, is they're really good at generating diverse images, whereas GANs are a little bit better at generating very particular data sets. I'm still not sure why I didn't get square. Maybe this is broken and I just got a widescreen option there. Let's check out our Pixray or Pixel one. Interesting. Let's say it's not very pixely. Maybe my prompt is just bad for that particular image. Oh, probably because I asked for a beautiful painting. I probably shouldn't have done that. Probably should have left it at this. That's my bad. Because I doubt there are beautiful paintings of pixel art. I'm sure there are some, but there probably are not many in our data set. Well, let's try one more of these text image models and just sort of see what's here. Training free text to image generator. I've actually never heard of this one, so let's just try it and see. This model can't be run or replicate because it built a version of Cog that is no longer supported. So there you go. This is what happens: is you find a thing that looks maybe cool, and then you find that it's a little out of date. So let's see if there's a better one in here. VQ Diffusion. Cool, that one works. All right. So this one is generation type. So there are probably, it's locked. Why is that locked? I guess it means I'm stuck with it in the wild text. Okay. So let's drop in. Oh, sign in to run this model. I've never seen this before. Okay, well, I have a GitHub account, so let's try it and see. Ah, there we go. Okay, so now I've signed in. And it looks like I'm signed in to replicate now. So now I can choose different options. So this image generator is sort of telling me what, there are probably different models here, and they've been trained on different data sets. So in the wild, it's probably just like a bunch of random scraped images. MS Coco is like a very famous data set. It's more object-based. ImageNet would again be sort of label-based. So I would say if you don't have a particular object in mind that fits with these data sets, in the wild text is probably your best option. We'll go ahead and drop this in here. So dog on top, dolphin in the ocean. Just gonna put dog on top of dolphin. image class. So there are many, many image classes here. I don't think we actually need to use this. Choose the ImageNet label. Okay, so this is only necessary when you've set this to ImageNet as a class.
Derek, one thing I would say, I don't know if you want to change the prompt again, but you could say, if you wanted to, you could say dog riding a dolphin in the ocean. I don't know if that would be more.
She had worse I've been using that one before.
And it's worse.
But that actually got worse results. Yeah, but let's just try it and see. It's fun to bring them back and see what happens. Yeah. So if you have one of these particular, if you really want to generate corn using text to image, what you would do is you would set this generation type to ImageNet. Your prompt should include corn or like something corn-like, or maybe you want to make a face out of corn. And then you would choose, this is corn, so 987. So for some of these models, they're very specific about what you're trying to generate. I'm going to leave this to in the wild because I don't want to deal with all that. Truncation rate, interesting. So there's truncation. So for those of you who are not familiar with truncation, in general, the lower you sort of want a middle value. That's going to generate something that's a little more realistic. And guidance scale, improved VQ diffusion with learnable classifier. Okay, so let's just leave it at 5. That's what the default was. I know that if I crank this up, it should approach more closely to the text prompts and move away from whatever it starts with. But if they decide to start the default at 5, we'll start the default at 5 and see what happens. We'll look at stuff like guidance scale a little bit more when we get into Stable Diffusion, because that's a really popular setting for Stable Diffusion. Okay, why don't we do this? This is probably going to take a minute. So why don't we take our break now? And when we come back, we'll see what the results of this are, and then we'll move into using Colab. So again, for this week, maybe dig around on some of these other models within Replicator and Huggingface spaces and see if you find anything cool that you weren't aware of before, maybe the channel, our Slack group wasn't aware of yet. So let's come back at 40 after. So we'll give everyone a 10-minute break to get up, stretch your leg, get some water, that sort of thing. All right, see you very shortly. Okay, so during the break, I ran this, and so, okay, I have to tell you, first off, I ran this once before, and then I went to download the images because I thought they were really cool. And when I hit download, it opened in the same tab, and I lost all the runs of the images I had. So if you're gonna use this, I guess like tab click, I'm not even gonna do it in case it screws up and doesn't work. But just be careful about downloading images because you might lose them. I guess you can probably save them from here. So do that. I actually thought the first round of the images were better than this round, but I still think that these are really interesting. I have no idea what this model like sort of works or does, but I get like clip art kind of looking like dog dolphin things. It's really interesting. So I don't know, maybe this is the model for you and you want to play with it more. It's called the VQ Diffusion. It's on Replicate. Never seen this one before, but it's very interesting. Cool, so that's sort of our result there. One other thing I wanted to mention in the Huggingface stuff was they do have a Stable Diffusion demo. And when I first played with it, there used to be under advanced options, you click on this and you could set different options here. Now, for whatever reason, they're now saying advanced settings are temporarily unavailable. It's been like that for a week or two now. So I don't know if they're just like gone and like it's no longer there, or if they're building it into like some sort of payment model or something. But this is kind of one of the frustrating things about some of these tools is like maybe eventually they turn stuff off on you and then you're like stuck like having to go back to Colab. So again, I would probably use these tools more as like a space to explore and try new models you hadn't heard of before. And then once you found a model you like, see if there's a Colab notebook or see if there's a GitHub repo where you can convert it into a Colab notebook. Because it's kind of, you get pretty limited results the further along you go with these tools. But, cool, I found a funny, weird little model that might be worth playing with and seeing if there's a Colab notebook or something more to investigate with. It's kind of the power of these tools. Any questions about Hugging Face or Replicate or any of these sort of like model zoo kind of tools?
Would you say it's pretty easy when you said like if you like a model on a Hugging Face, like and like you find that there's a GitHub repo that you can convert it to a Colab notebook, is that like pretty self-explanatory, or like, is there
Not
some
always.
legwork to doing that?
I would say my hope is that they have like, so I just found the link to this one. So let's see what's here. I mentioned it's a Microsoft tool. Okay. Looks like this is a duplicate of another thing. So in this case, I do not see a Colab notebook here. This is kind of where it would be like, well, I need to go in and dig in and see what I can actually do, or like how it sort of explains it. It might not be easy in many cases, unfortunately. Let's see if this version has anything. Yeah. So what I might also do is I might also just Google, like, let's say Colab, and let's just say VQ Diffusion, and see if anyone else has written one. It looks like someone on Reddit might have one. Yep. So here we go. So someone did make this. We'd have to go through it and run it and see if that happens. Ideally, that should be everything we need, but who knows if this is broken or not working the way we expect it to or something. Converting a GitHub repo to a Colab notebook definitely requires a little bit of like being comfortable in using these tools. Maybe that's something we'll save for like a later session. I think I recorded a video a long time ago on how to use this and how to do that, but it's probably a little out of date these days. But it's not the hardest thing. It's not the easiest thing. It's somewhere right in the middle of, like, depending on how good their instructions are, it might be pretty easy. But most of these places do not write the best instructions or docs. So sometimes it's a little tricky to sort of get it all figured out. This would generally be what I would do, is I would say, like, if it's not in the repo, then I would just Google it and see if someone wrote one that does work. Yeah, so it'd be cool to sort of try this and see what happens. Yeah. If anyone's interested, I'll drop this link in the chat for us as well. Okay, so with that, let's actually talk a little bit about Colab. So obviously we've talked a little about Colab a little bit last week, and that's going to be like mostly what we're going to be using this for the rest of this class. I would say for this class in particular, the $10 a month plan is probably fine. That's probably going to get us everything we need for this class. $10 a month is going to get you a T4 guaranteed every time, which is slow. But as we saw with like these other image generation tools, it's not the end of the world. Instead of it taking us 30 seconds to generate an image, it might take us 3 minutes, which, you know, doing that over and over and over again can be kind of annoying. But it is a little bit, for the price, it's probably fine. The $50 a month model gets you an A100 fairly frequently. You have to sort of declare it and set it up and that sort of thing. You also burn through credits a lot faster, but it's much faster. I will say, however, sometimes because A100 is like the latest architecture, not every model actually runs on it, which can be kind of frustrating itself. So I would say stick with the Colab Pro plan. That's probably going to be enough for you. And if you don't really want to spend that money, you can play with the Huggingface demos and replicate until they charge you. And maybe you can use the Colab free version for a little bit. Kind of up to you. I think the downside of a lot of this is just like those GUIs were fairly easy to run because they're really simple. Lots of people sort of, when they get into Colab, are like, oh man, this is a coding interface. It's so hard to read. It's so hard to understand. And even though there is some GUI that people built for some of these things, it's still a little bit of a challenge to sort of get over that hurdle. And a lot of these like fully fledged notebooks, all they do is fill out more and more GUIs and more fields to fill out. That can get kind of daunting in that space as well. So, you know, that's sort of the trade-off is price, complexity, but then on the upside, which is what we'll look at today in this session, is just like you get a lot more control over all these settings, right? So you just have a ton more capability to sort of like play with various things. Oh, so Mackenzie, so one of the things is, we'll look at this in just a minute. You do need to specify what GPU you want. So I don't know if you're doing, there's one that's called standard and then premium. You do have to specify premium in order to get the better GPUs. That's sort of been a new change. I don't know if you're aware of that. We'll look at that in a minute because I am on Pro Plus. So I'll show you what Pro Plus looks like.
Derek,
yep.
when would you want to select high for the, you know, one of them is selecting premium or standard. The other one is selecting standard versus high. When would you want to use the high?
So that's for RAM. So that's more of a data input than it is about GPU.
Okay.
I would say you should you only really need to set high if you like have crashed your GPU. And usually that's more when you're running lots of data. So it's more like when you're training or other things that you'll need a high RAM setup. I don't know how Google Colab is so weird now with the new pricing structure. I don't know if they charge extra for high RAM or not. Like it's very confusing to me. So I would say by default, you can leave it at standard. And only if you crash your GPU do you really, or crash the RAM, do you really actually need to use the high.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. All right. All right, so let's go through a couple of Colab notebooks. I know some of these you guys have probably played with in my previous classes, but I think they're fun to look at again. So we'll start with Aphantasia. I'll drop the link in here for everybody. So I like Aphantasia because Aphantasia does not actually use a machine learning model to generate your images. It uses direct RGB manipulation. So it's actually like directly affecting pixels, which gives it a very like interesting look. It gives it a very unique look, which I think is really fascinating. So we'll just go over basics on how to run Colab notebooks again, because I know we didn't really do that last week. So first things first, pretty much with every one of our machine learning models, we're going to want to run and use a GPU. So the way to set your GPU is to go to runtime, change runtime type, and then under here you'll have, depending on what level of Colab you're on, if you're on the regular Colab, you will probably not see these last two sections. You'll just see hardware accelerator, and you'll be able to set it to none, GPU or TPU. For most of our cases, unless someone says where they're running JAX or something and you know you need to use a TPU, you're going to run a GPU. For those of you that are either on the free version of Colab or on Colab Pro, you probably don't see GPU class or runtime shape. That just means that you will always be given a standard GPU. If you do upgrade, then you have the option of standard or premium. And I have to say, it's basically T4 or A100. Like I've yet to get anything but those two. So the days of V100s and P100s seem to have disappeared. It's good or bad. I don't know. It's like, I wish they offered a P100 for the standard because that'd be a little bit faster. And I wish they could let you select a V100 or an A100 because a V100 is, or an A100 is like too much power. That's like, you know, trying to get across the street with like, I don't know, a rocket ship in most cases. So I wish they had a little bit more offering than there, but today they don't. So it's just standard or premium. And runtime shape, this is what you were asking about, Nat. It's just really about RAM. So I'd say standard is almost always what you need, unless you're doing training or something crazy with data. Like sometimes when I do a lot of video work in a notebook, I might max out the RAM because I'm processing a lot of video, in which case I might set it to high RAM. So once you do that, once you've set your settings up, you'll hit save. And then to connect to the notebook and to connect to your GPU, you actually come up here and hit connect. And now we're connected. Now, I know for a fact that this model or this particular notebook already tells me what GPU I have. But I think it's just helpful for everyone to know that if you want to find out what GPU you have, you can add a code cell. Just hover over between text and whatever and add code cell. And then you come in here and type exclamation point NVIDIA-SMI-L. And when you run that, first I was going to say, should you run this notebook? It will spit out exactly what GPU you have. So like I said, standard always gives you a T4. If I were to switch this to the high or the premium, I would probably get 100. So Mackenzie, your question about would high RAM allow you to run larger init images? Possibly. The challenge is that because it's CPU RAM, at the end of the day, resolution is really dependent on GPU RAM. So this is a case of where if you have an A100, which has, I think, 48 gigabytes of VRAM, you'll get much larger images than you would with a 16 gigabyte VRAM. Yeah, so usually it's restricted by VRAM, not by CPU RAM. There's little nuances there, but that's mostly that's the easiest way to think about it. Okay, so I know I've got a T4 now. That's just helpful for me to know because, you know, I know it's going to be a little bit slower than I'm used to with like a V100 or whatever. So next step is this notebook. I actually think is very well documented. Vadim, who made this tool, like he does a really good job of sort of, you know, documenting all the tools. So I actually think it's fairly easy to read. I actually went through this earlier today with my ITP class, so I know I can walk us through this very easily. So first things first, we have to do our setup. We're just going to install all the code we need in order to get this running. This took me about a minute earlier this week, or today. Got those today. So this shouldn't take too long. They're just going to install some additional dependencies and things that we need for this particular model. This is again where like Huggingface kind of hides all that behind the scenes, but here we have to actually do it ourselves. While this runs, we'll go ahead and talk about some of the settings. So in this particular example, or the way that this one is set up, is you add text and then you also add style, and those two are separate. So in this case, let's do our dog riding a dolphin, a dog riding a dolphin in the ocean. And here I might say, what should my style be? Should it be, let's say, futurist painting? Now, I think what actually goes on, I haven't really dug into this too much. I think what goes on behind the scenes is these two just get added together for the text prompts. But it might be that that Vadim is doing something fancy and like actually separating this out. But in this case, you can keep these two together. There's also a field here for subtract. We'll talk about subtraction more next week. But this is the idea of I want to see something. There shouldn't be something in the image. So a very common one that you'll see people put in here is graffiti or text. This is because the clip models of old used to actually embed text into your image. If you asked for something like a dog or a dolphin, the word dog or dolphin might actually appear in your image. So a very common thing that people would do is they would add graffiti or text to the subtraction so that the model would purposely try to avoid adding text or adding graffiti into the image. This tool is by default meant for English language, but you can do translation. So if you want to like put in like, I don't know, a Spanish phrase and have it translated to English, you would put Spanish up here and then you would just hit translate. And this will use like Google Translate or something else in the back end to actually auto translate it to English. So here again, maybe you want to play with the idea that like languages, concepts, things get mistranslated or whatever, you could do that. I think I don't know what multi-language would actually do. I guess maybe it would try a bunch of different languages. I've never really played with that before, but that's an option. And this does allow you to upload an image, which would mean it's like a starting image, and you would actually build on top of that. We won't cover that in this session. We'll cover it more in a couple of weeks when we get to image initializations, but just know this tool does support that. So the important thing to remember about Colab, and I honestly screw this up quite often myself, is that just because you set these settings doesn't mean they're saved to the runtime. So until you hit play, these are not saved to the runtime. So quite often I might just like skip over hitting the play button and then I'll go and run it and it'll be like, I don't have a phrase, it'll throw an error. So make sure you hit play after you've saved your settings. Next, we have additional settings here. So the key here is like, actually this model is quite fast in the terms of how fast it generates images. But know that the bigger your image is, the longer it's going to take to generate. So for this demo, let's make this a little bit smaller. So let's say side X and side Y at 480. Or actually, let's do 512. I assume this is using clip and it's trained at 256. So 512 will be kind of a nice double size. Model, does he have? Okay, so we'll talk about this a little bit more as we get into later weeks. You can actually use multiple clip models at any one time. The idea being that, let's say, what's a good analogy here? So let's say I asked a class of students what images look like dogs and what images look like cats, and I purposely showed them images that look a little bit like both. And if I poll only one student, I would get a single answer, right? It's either a dog or a cat. But if I poll multiple students in the class, I might be more likely to get the average result. So this dual is actually saying use two different models, and I believe it's using VITB/32 and VITB/16. You could instead set up, so these are actually different clip models. So the clip models themselves have been trained on different data. So every one of these clip models will result in a slightly different image because they use a different like clip scoring algorithm or clip scoring data set. Using dual, we'll use 2 of them instead of any single one. And we've sort of learned over the past couple of years, all these researchers have learned that the more models you make available to it, the more likely it is to get to a realistic position. So in this case, let's leave it at dual. The downside of this is that the more models you run for your clip scoring, the slower it takes, or the more RAM you use, right? So the challenge here is like, how can I get as many models to score this without, bloating my VRAM and crashing it, or without slowing it to a crawl? That's sort of the trade-off here. So leave it at dual. Alignment, there's some nice notes here that I'm honestly just reading. Option about composition. Uniform looks most adequate. Overscan can make semi-seamless tileable textures. Okay, we'll leave this at uniform. Aesthetic. So what is aesthetic? Enforces overall cuteness. Maybe set to negative. So if I wanted a really ugly dog or dolphin, I guess I could set this to like -1. We'll leave it at 1. Usually for me, when I first come to a notebook for the first time, the first thing I do is I just use all the default settings. One, I want to make sure it runs correctly. And then 2, I want to start to like basically begin to isolate my variables. So, okay, let me just play with just the aesthetic score and see what happens there. There actually is this is probably based on Catherine Crossan's aesthetic scoring system, which is a little bit of a, if I find some documentation, let me make some notes here. There's an aesthetic scoring system, which is, I would argue it's maybe not what you think it is, but I'll try to find some documentation on that for anyone that's interested. Use wavelets. I'm going to skip that one. Again, there's lots of good documentation here if you're interested, and I will skip all of these looks. And the main thing that I want to focus on here is steps. So again, steps are the most important part of, well, in addition to text prompts, are the most important part of how these models train, right? Do I want a few steps, which means it's going to be pretty, loose, or do I want a lot of steps, which means it's going to spend a lot of time really dialing in the results? This is by default 150. Let's say if he has a recommendation here. Doesn't look like he does. Steps. Setting steps much higher, 1000, will elaborate details and make the tone smoother, but may start throwing text like graffiti. So it looks like he's saying, something under 1000 is generally good. Let's just set this to 250. I think that will give us a nice, again, how many steps is how long it's going to take to run. So because we've got a little bit of time today, I don't want to dig in too much into this. So let's leave it at that. Samples, I believe, is fine as is. Decrease samples if you face out of memory errors. So if we hit, it's a RAM meter. So basically, this is how many samples of the image we take for every clip score. So actually, my analogy of taking the single image and applying that to clip is not always true. This actually takes 200 samples of the single image and it sends that to clip and then averages them all. So if you wanted less of these to run faster, you would set this to like 100, and that would also use less RAM. I'm going to leave everything else as is. So there's a lot of different little settings in here, and here you can sort of see you could spend a month just playing with each one of these settings and really dialing in and learning about all the different features of these things. And instead, most people run through these models one day at a time, right? They just skip over everything. So again, you could sit with one of these models and really dig into it. Vadim has a ton of video tutorials or just video demos of what he's done with these things that are really fascinating. Aphantasia is also, if you've heard of Illustrip, which is a tool that I've played with before that also generates video. It's the same thing. It's just a video generating model of this individual image model. But some really cool techniques in there as well. So because I've seen my settings, let's just go ahead and hit play to save my settings. And then finally, I can come down here and hit run. And you'll see it needs to download our samples. Actually, it needs to download some models, I guess.
Derek, question while that's happening.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you were saying that I didn't quite hear what you said about this particular model, that it was a bit different from others because of, I didn't get what that was.
Yeah, it's a bit different because it doesn't use a GAN or it doesn't use diffusion. It's actually just using pixel manipulation. So you'll see this model has a very this very noisy texture. And that's because of how it's generating the image. So the first thing is you'll notice that like compared to VQGAN, this is much faster. It's not really faster compared to Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion is on a whole other level. But what you'll see is that you're getting these really like interesting textures. And if I were to use a much bigger image, like say 1024 by 1024, you would really see some of the noise pixels in the image. And that's sort of what's interesting about this tool. It's not using a GAN or a diffusion model to generate the image.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Mhm.
Is that like, it kind of looks like there's almost like a signature in the lower right corner. Is that what I'm seeing?
That's pretty common with these models.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty common you get signatures, especially if you ask for a painting or anything like that. You will generally see like weird blobby signatures in the bottom.
Mm.
So one of the things that's interesting here is because I asked for a futurist painting, I'm getting like some staircasing examples here. The waves in the background are very much like 30s era, like sort of modernism. So again, it definitely is picking up on some of the styles. What I would also say about this model is it's not particularly good at generating really good compositions. It does generate sort of these blobby shapes. And a lot of that is because of how this model really works. It really relies on noise to really maintain a lot of its shape and consistency.
Why did it put a signature on there when you said generate without text? Does it not recognize it as text?
It might not. The other thing is generally these tools will highlight what's happening in the middle of the image quite often, especially because this one is built around uniform or center, I think is what it called, the alignment. So it's really mostly looking at the scoring of the center of the image, which means it's probably going to skip stuff in the corners. So an interesting thing about this model that I sort of like is that it will generate a video of how it trained over time. So you can actually watch it sort of train. And the thing I like about this is that you can then see sort of where these noise blobs led to an influence of the outputs. So this is where my noise sort of started. So let me get this centered in here a little bit. And so you'll see, I set my steps to 250, but halfway through the video, it was pretty much done. And all it was doing was like really changing those last couple pixels. So if I were really pressed for time, I might cut my steps in half because it's very likely going to give me a good image by then. But you'll see here, you know, look how quickly we get our shape. So this is Aphantasia. I've got some other videos on using Illustrip and digging into this one a little bit more. So I'll link to those as well. You can note here for myself, Illustrip tutorial. So we can play with this one more. I just want to show this because I really do like, I like the sort of the way this looks. I like the sort of pixely texture. I feel like there's no other model out there that really generates this. So again, depending on what you're trying to look like or your look and feel for this, you might want to play with these tools. Okay, so that is Aphantasia. So another thing that's very, very important these days with Colab is do not just close your tab. If you close your tab, it's likely going to run in the background. So the way to turn off these models, there's two ways. One I'll talk about more next week, which is actually adding a code cell. But the easiest way to turn this off is to just go to Manage Sessions and just go to Terminate. And now that it's terminated, I've got no active sessions. I'm no longer being charged my credits for this. It's a very important thing with the new Colab because old Colab, it would just turn off and they'd be like, hey, try not to do that. Now they're just going to charge you more and more credits. So like eventually they'll be like, hey, you owe us money for this. So just be careful about that. Okay, let's look at Disco Diffusion. I have a whole long video on Disco Diffusion. And as we will see, Disco Diffusion has a lot of settings. And I am not going to go over nearly the number of settings we need to for this one. But there's a ton of settings in here. And this is really where like, this was one of the like maybe second or third generation of these text to image notebooks that you feel like you could do everything in it. But you also need to spend like a month digging into the tool. So we'll go ahead and we'll just hit connect again. Let me just check my runtime. Make sure I'm using a GPU. I am. For my demo, I'm just gonna switch to premium just so hopefully we can run through this a little bit quicker. Okay, so there's a whole long license up the top here, which we can sort of ignore. Let's go down to our setup. So first we're going to run check GPU status. And sure enough, I have an A100. So I haven't set the premium, which means that it's 40 gigabytes of VRAM, which is a lot. It means I could crank up my resolution quite a lot, but I would run into like speed issues, essentially. It would just take a while. Prepare my folders. So if you want to connect to Google Drive, you can. You just check this button. I'm just going to do this a little bit quicker. So I'm just going to run this without doing this. Okay, interesting. All right, cool. We do not want to use a CPU because the CPU is going to be extremely slow. So we'll skip that. And then we do need to define these functions. One thing I learned is that even though it looks like these might be optional, you still need to run them. And that's interesting. Okay, let me try this. Let me turn this back on and see if that fixes anything. So the good thing if you do turn these buttons on, or if you turn these checkboxes on, is it's going to save any models that you need to download directly to Drive. So when you run this the second time, it's going to be a little bit faster because we'll need to download like terabytes of files or gigabytes of files, I guess. All right, let's see if it fixed anything here. Oh, okay. This is what I got tripped up on. You still need to run 1.3. It's just don't check this, because you want to install dependencies and then you need to actually define it. So we still need to run this, but we just don't want to check this box. So go ahead and run play on 1.3. We'll run play on 1.4. And we'll run play on 1.5. And we'll run play on 1.6. And while that runs in the background, we can go ahead and start talking about some of these models. So Disco comes with a number of different diffusion models. You'll see there is 256 by 256, 512 by 512, portrait generator, pixel art diffusion maker, or expanded, pixel art diffusion soft. Like these are all different models. So these are all different image generators. So depending on what you choose, you will get a different style of output in your image. So for example, obviously, if you were going to use portrait generator, you would want your text prompt to be about portraits. This thing is only going to generate portraits. So don't use this and then try to ask for a dog on a spaceship in space, right? I mean, you get a very weird result, but it wouldn't be one-to-one. Most people use the Diffusion unconditioned fine-tune 080-100 because this is the most open. It's going to generate the most wide range of images. But if you have a particular look that you really want to go into, like you can set one of these other ones as well. Now, the 256 and the 512 by 512 does not mean you are limited to that size. What it means is that it generates at that dimension. And this is where I was talking about, you might want to start at 512 by 512, because that's going to give you the most realistic looking image output because it generates at the same size as the model can generate. You can do a different size. You can make it rectangular. You can make it portrait. The challenge is that what's going to kind of happen is almost going to collage two generators into one. So you'll actually get kind of like double images. So if you ask for a single person and you have a widescreen 1024 by 512, you will likely get two people in your image. That's kind of the downside of these tools, is they're still really meant to generate single squares and you can get more out of it. But depending on what you're prompting, you might get some weird body horror stuff. Like it's a little bit easier to say, I want a skyline that is 1024 by 512 because you might get different new looking buildings in your skyline, but it still looks like a skyline. Whereas if you ask for something that is like a dog, a single dog in the middle of a park, you might end up with a wiener dog that gets stretched, or like a dog with 8 legs or 10 legs or something. That's kind of the challenge with these tools. But that's the thing to know about these models, is they're not saying that you have to define it at that size. They're just saying that's the size it begins to generate at. So we have the 512 here again. Here are all of the clip settings. So you could use all of these different settings. You could turn all of them on. And actually with an A100, I bet you could. A100 has so much VRAM, they'll probably be able to generate all of these different clip models. But what I would say is leaving these two on for sure is good. And then the RN50 is generally the other one that people turn on. But you could play with different, again, if you've got a month and you want to explore one concept, you could explore like what happens if I turn each of these on or on and off, and how does that affect my image generating? There are also open clips. So in addition to the OpenAI clip settings, there's a team that built all of these open versions. So they're open source versions. So if you see something called Lion, that is a company called Eleuther AI, and they went through and they trained all of this. So actually the stable diffusion models are actually trained on the same data set that these open clip data set models are. So you could turn these on if you wanted to. Most people just use the clip ones and it's fine. Because I've set these settings, I need to run this cell. So I'm gonna hit run. And it looks like I'm still downloading. No, okay, cool. Yeah, so it's got to download those models.
Hey, Derek, how concerned should we be when we get a warning when we're running a Colab notebook that this notebook may have access to your Google Drive or whatever?
It's a fair question. I would say probably check your sources on or also just check what's in your drive. Maybe don't save personal documents in your Google Drive account because maybe it's scraping them. I doubt it. I mean, in most cases, I don't think any of these tools are really trying to do anything nefarious, but it's always good just to be sure, like, hey, do I know who made this? Did I find it from some person on Twitter who I've trusted before? Is it from some random blog or someone on Reddit? It's a good thing to be safe or think about, but in general, I would say don't stick anything important in Drive. Don't stick a image of your social security card or anything in Drive. It's a bad idea.
Right. As far as people stealing any of your images and stuff, you never worry about things like that, or models or anything else?
I don't think anyone cares enough to do that. It's just it would be so much effort, and if someone found out that they were doing it, it would destroy their career within this space. That I just don't think anyone we're not that competitive yet. Maybe in the future we will be, but as of right now, we're not. Okay,
thanks.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to skip custom model settings because we don't need to run that. Now we are finally to our settings. So if you've ever looked at Disco Diffusion before, you know that there are a lot of settings in here. And I'm going to skip most of them because they're not super important for us to just sort of understand how this model works. But we can look at this here really quickly. So the first is we want to name our batch. So one of the cool things about Disco is it can generate as many images as you request, and it saves them into a folder. So we're going to save this into our folder. Let's call it words are images test. It's going to make a folder in Google Drive since I'm connected to Drive, and it's going to save all my images there. Next is steps. So let's leave this at 250. That's probably fine for what we're doing. Actually, let's lower this. We'll make it 150. It runs a little bit faster. Next is width and height. So let's just do 512 by 512. And that's going to generate a good image for us then. Clip guidance scale. So this is how strong our image should correlate to clip. And this value is kind of arbitrary. I've seen people crank it up to 100,000. And that means clip has a really strong influence on your image, but it can sometimes backfire. So maybe let's say 10,000. We'll just have our clip text be really strong. I'm gonna skip over these other ones. There's a tutorial at the top of the page if you wanna know what each one of these does. But for this, we'll kind of skip it. We can skip the image dimensions for the 256 by 256 model because we're not using that. We'll skip over the video settings because we're not doing video yet. And we'll skip over the init image settings because we're also not doing initialized images for this test. I have demos and tutorials for this for other things if you want them, for using video and for using images. So go ahead and save these settings. And for animation settings, even though we're not doing animation, we do need to run this. And for extra settings, similarly, even though we're not using any settings, we need to run this again. And now we're going to put in our prompts. And for my own sanity, let's just delete the 100 and we'll just leave in 0. And here is where we put in our prompts. So let's do a beautiful painting of a dog riding a dolphin in the ocean. Now, we'll cover this a little bit more when we get into prompting next week, but this can also take in multiple prompts. You can feed in a second prompt. You can add weights to your prompts. So we'll cover a lot more of that next week because it's really powerful. But in this case, let's just use a single prompt for now. So we'll save our prompt here. And then we've got our actual run that we can do. So the display rate is how often, so during our steps, how often we refresh and see the new image. I like to set this to like a 10. I think that's a nice number. And then batches is how many images it's going to produce. So this would actually produce 50 images. It's going to run through every time and produce a new image. This would take quite a while. Let's just set this to 1 for now, just so we can generate a single image. We can skip the rest of this. The rest of this is if you are doing animation and your Colab notebook shuts off. This allows you to resume and pick up where you left off. So in a lot of cases, like during like a minute-long animation using this tool, using like a standard GPU setting would take days. So in this case, you want to be able to pick up where you left off in Colab. And I think we're good here. So we're just going to run this and save it. And I believe as soon as we hit play, it'll start actually running and generating our image. If you see this Google Drive error has occurred, don't worry about it too much. In my experience, what that means is that, excuse me, sorry. Trying to sip a drink here. That means that there's some latency issue with Google Drive. Files still write to Google Drive, it just takes a little bit longer. So you might not, if you go to Google Drive in this exact minute, you might not see everything there, but come back 10 minutes later and it actually is there. That's usually what I get out of this error message. Okay, so we've now seen a couple steps. We saw our very noisy image. And now we're seeing our less noisy image. And every time this hits a multiple of 10, we'll see an updated image. Roxy, you should share some of the explorations you did in our class around the disco stuff. It's really, really fascinating. So Rox in our previous class did like a lot of exploration using disco. And there's some nice little examples of like how different weights or how much influence you have over initialized images using those tools. So if you want to share that, I think it'd be great for people to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, I'm hitting that wall where like I've been teaching for like 4 or 5 hours today now, and my voice is just gone. We'll have to plan ahead for this next time. So we're seeing here, we've got like some painting-ish images of a dog's butt, a dolphin or a shark's head, a dolphin tail into a dog head. I don't know what the hell is going on here, but we're getting some interesting results.
What's that in the background? Is that an angel or something?
I don't know what the hell that is. Something. What was my text prompt? A beautiful painting? I don't know. It's starting to look like a dolphin. It's starting to look like a dolphin, I don't know, with like, what are those fish that have all that stuff hanging off them? Kind of looks like that. Cool. So I can run this again. And then I get a different image. You know, this again allows for a lot of randomization in the process. But this was up until, you know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, this was sort of like the latest and greatest of tools. I actually think Disco is really helpful. Like when you begin to build an animation and other things and use initialized images, that's where it gets really powerful. But even with Stable Diffusion, you can do a lot of that these days as well. This is Disco. Again, I have a lot of tutorials because, again, for a while, this was sort of the hot tool. So if anyone's interested in some of the bigger settings and other things for this, I'll let you know about that. Another thing I should have mentioned, a really important trick that I've found that most people use is under extra settings, there is the thing called intermediate saves. And what that does is it saves out the image as it's going through the process. So if you were to set this to 10, it'll save out it'll save out 10 images from 0 to 100 steps. Actually, it'll save it 11. It'll save out, I guess you actually really want this. This will save out 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% in your final image. The reason a lot of people do this is most of the time, what you actually do not want with this model is the 100th, the last image. It adds a lot of noise and crunchiness in the last 10% of your model. So what a lot of people do is they actually use the 90% or a little bit more than 90% of their image. It has a slightly smoother look to it, which is better for like paintings and things. That's a little trick that lots of people have sort of learned with these particular models, is that you don't really want that 100% image. You want something a little backed off that because it's got a little bit less noise and grain in it. So you would just set that up here. You could even set up, if you want like the 95th percentile, I guess it would be like, I don't know, it'd be like 19 or something like that. And that would give you 95 that you could then pull from. It's a little trick for anyone interested in using this model and getting the best results out of it. Okay, that is Disco. I want to show one last thing, which is, oops, and of course I don't want to actually do this. I want to turn off my notebook. So we'll terminate this. We'll close. And unlike the other notebook, unlike Aphantasia did not save it directly to Drive. This one does save it directly to Drive, which is nice because then you don't need to worry about downloading your files or anything before terminating your machine. Okay, last thing for today is I want to look at how to use our web GUI. So we won't cover Stable Diffusion. I have an example notebook here of just going through the basics of Stable Diffusion. I also have a tutorial with this one, so I'll link to that for anyone that's interested in it. But I want to do before we start next week, really digging into these tools, is getting this web GUI set up. So let's go ahead and start with this. Let's go ahead and open this in Colab. And here again, we're going to set our runtime. So make sure your runtime is set to GPU. We'll leave it at standard and we'll hit save. The first thing they recommend doing is connecting this to Google Drive. This is so that we save all of our models and things there, so that way we don't ever have to re-download them and slow ourselves down again next time. Okay, so now we're mounted. I'm going to go ahead and click update repo because I haven't updated this in a couple weeks, couple days, I guess. I don't know. You might not have to since this is probably your first time installing this. You just run this and it should install all of the dependencies and code that you need to do. While this runs, let's go back to Huggingface. So I hope everyone created an account and logged in, because what we need you to do now is go to your settings and profile. And once you're in here, you're going to go to your access tokens. And for my purpose for this class, since I'm recording this, I'm going to create a new token. You will also need to create a new token. So follow along with these steps. So hit new token. And I'm going to call this auto 1111. That's probably what you should call yours, just so you know what it is. I'm going to call it demo just for my own sanity. So I know to delete it later because I'm going to share this with the world and I don't want them stealing my tokens. So just set this as an access token and then click generate token. And what you'll want to do is hit copy. copy icon. So copy your token out of there. What this is going to do is, in order to download our models from Hugging Space, we need to have an access token that allows us to actually do this. Realizing there might be one more step here that I may need you to go through that I don't need to. Okay, so we're going to need to download the latest version of Stable Diffusion, which is 1.5. So we're going to keep this at 1.5. If you wanted to use a different version, you could, but 1.5 is fine. Let's skip the in-painting model for now. And then down below here, it says token. So we're going to paste in our token. Now, I should note that this is, especially for me, because I'm recording this, this is now basically like anyone can see this, right? So do not share your tokens with other people. It means they might be like getting access to your models or something through there. I might be doing something nefarious with it. So as soon as I'm done recording the session, I'm deleting this token so no one can use it. But just be aware that this is plain text, which is not the best security purpose, but it works for us.
Sorry.
You could also, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so is there a step that you need to actually agree to something on
Yes.
Hugging Face? Yeah.
That was what I was going to say, is there is a
Okay.
step, and I think what'll happen here is, so you can choose read, read is fine as a token rocks. There is a step here, let me find it really quickly. Stable Diffusion. So if you go to this page, you will likely see something different than I do, which is that on the model card, there will be some button here that says you need to agree to the terms in order to get access to this model. Unfortunately, I've already done this. Let me see if I log out, if this shows up for me. Sign out.
If you just go right, if you just go to the home page again.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So
Okay.
here it is. So basically, like you will see something that says you need to log in or sign up in order to agree to the information. Basically, they just like want to make sure they know who's downloading these models in case something weird happens in the future. So for me, I would log in, and then there's like an agree button that says agree to the terms. And you'll need to press that in order to actually like then begin to gain access to downloading it through the API. If you don't do that, it'll give you an error message. It'll say something like, you need to agree to the API, go here and do that. So I'm just warning you now that you'll need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to this Stable Diffusion 1.5 link, in your browser, you should see something that says like, here's the model card information and I agree to the terms.
Do you need to download it and then put it in the models folder, or?
This will move it for you. I believe this will move
Okay.
it for you. We'll double
Okay.
check and be sure. So once you've done that, now you can come back, add in your token, and then we will, I think we have everything here we need. So we're gonna press play, which should download the model for us. I believe mine's already downloaded, so I don't know if it's even gonna like do anything, but we'll run this and see. Yeah, so see, mine says model already exists. Yours likely will say, I'm downloading a model. It's gonna have a little progress bar. If you didn't agree to the terms, it'll say, hey, you have to go agree to the terms before you can download it. So go agree to the terms, come back and run this cell again. Do anyone run into issues with this? Okay, cool. So this is now downloading. Now what we need to do is run the install requirements. This will take a couple minutes again as well. Now, when we run this last section here, which is start Stable Diffusion, what it's going to do, and this is very different than other Colab notebooks, it's actually not going to generate anything in Colab. It's going to give us a link. It's going to give us a URL, and we'll copy that URL and we'll paste it into a new tab. And then what we'll get is actually a GUI, a whole page, like really nicely, nicely designed GUI that will allow us to do a lot of stuff. What that's actually doing behind the scenes is it's just using Colab server, and then we're talking to the server via this GUI. So we won't actually do anything in the Colab notebook, but we need to leave the Colab notebook tab open because that's maintaining our connection, right? If we close our tab, we might lose our connection. So it's important to keep this tab open. And all we're going to do is open up a new tab and then have like a really nice interface that we can then play with for future stuff in this class. I recognize we're at time. I'm probably just gonna stick around for another 5 minutes just to show how this works. So if you need to take off, that's totally fine. We'll have the recording up in an hour or two. Okay, this just finished. So now I'm gonna hit Start Stable Diffusion. And I'm not gonna click on either of these buttons. I'm just gonna hit Start Stable Diffusion. What I should get when this is finished is it should display like a URL that I need to copy and paste.
Hey, Derek, just confirming with the installing the repo, you only tick update if you'd had already installed before, is that right? Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it's any problem if you check the box anyway. I won't do anything new, but for me, I don't think you need to.
Okay.
So one thing I should also note is if you just Google automatic 11111, you will find that there is a GitHub repo. And this GitHub repo has a Colab notebook in it. Oh, okay, maybe he pulled it out. That's good. There is a Colab notebook in here, or there was at one point, and it was broken. So I'm using a forked version of that repo in order to do the Colab installation. So just be aware of that. I think in the wiki here, let's see if there's a wiki. Should be some wiki installation stuff here. Colab. Okay, yeah. So he's listed, there's some forked collabs. You'll see his is outdated. I assume it's a he, that's probably bad of me. But this person, automatic 11111, had a collab that is broken, so don't use that. So use this other, I'm using the one by the last Ben. That's the one I'm using. Okay, and slowly but surely we're getting our results here. This is probably because I'm on a T4. Again, it's a little slower, but it's cheaper, so it's probably fine for us. When we start class, not next week since we won't be live, but the week after, we'll go through this exact process again because we want to start up this notebook in order to have access to these tools.
Sorry, again, I missed how to get the token.
Oh, yeah, okay. So the token is if you go to huggingface.co/settings/tokens.
Okay.
And then on this page, assuming you're logged in, you'll need to be logged in. There's a button here to click new token. You'll click new token, and then you just call this something like, web GUI. Just call it something that you know what it is. And then you can leave the role as read, and you'll just hit generate token.
Okay.
And then you'll just copy the token using a little copy icon. And if you want to delete your tokens, you can delete them at any time. You just go to manage and then just hit delete. Or you can do, what was the other option? It was invalidate and refresh. That works too. Again, I really think you only need that token to download the model. Once it's downloaded, I don't think you need the tokens anymore. I don't think it has like a read write sort of thing with the tokening system. Okay, cool. So now we finally have here our URL. Your URL should probably be different than mine. Oh wait, I'm on an A100. That was really slow for an A100. Man, okay. Just realized that. So this URL here is what we want to use to now access our web GUI. So you're just going to copy this URL. You're going to make a new tab, and you're going to paste this in. And you're going to say yes, click continue. And now we have this rather crazy interface for all of these tools, but I promise you, like, we're going to go through these tools and it's going to be awesome. There's going to be a ton of features here that we can use for this tool. But first look, you're like, whoa, there's a lot here. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. But basically, like you can sort of go through our class schedule and see like, oh, in week 4, we're going to be doing image to image. In week like 5, we're going to be doing training. So this will cover all of the things we need in order to be able to generate some images. So this is now Stable Diffusion. Up at the top here, we've got our checkpoint option. So this will allow us to pick if we generate multiple checkpoints. So I think Adam, maybe you had shared, there's that new anime checkpoint. You can download that model and stick it in this folder. And maybe I'll show you how to do that next week, or maybe I'll record a video on how to do that. You can then pull and choose from different checkpoints. So if it says model checkpoint, that just means that's the one we downloaded.
Yeah, Derek, I was going to say that was something
yeah.
I was going to actually ask you was like recently, because of people are hinting at copyright, I've been downloading all of the ones off Huggingface that I like.
Yep.
And
Yep.
but what I'm doing right now is just downloading them to my computer and then uploading them to my drive. But I see with your model download, like I can probably get it's got a wget on it. I could probably go in there and just customize a cell, so I would just grab them directly and then put them into my drive, right?
Yep, that's probably the easiest way, because they are pretty large, right? They're like a couple gigabytes, so it's gonna be a long time.
Sort of like an afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you could probably do that. From here, we've just got like, hey, here's what you can do to now put in text. So let's just say a dog riding a dolphin in the ocean. And we'll go through some more of these as we go through class. I would say the defaults are all pretty good for these to start with. So we'll use the Euler A sampling method. We'll use 512 by 512, that's fine. We will skip a couple of these and we'll just do a config scale of say 10. And we'll talk about seeds more as we get into image generation. This is random seeding, right? So if I want to always have the same noise starting my image, like I want to sort of start with the same noise and sort of slowly tweak this, I would set the seed to a value is not negative. -1 means no noise or like randomize the noise no matter what. Let's just do 1. That way we've got it sort of here. And then I think this is enough for us to hit generate, see what we get. So I think the first time we run this, it takes a little bit of time because it's trying to download stuff. Now, if you go back to your Colab notebook, you'll see here, our output is telling us what's actually happening. So this is basically like, you can always come back here, and if you're not sure if you're getting an error message or something, you can come back here and see if an error was spit out. You will usually get errors spit out here as well, but just in case, you can kind of sort of see how that works. Now, we may also have, where are steps? Oh, steps are here. So sampling steps. So 20 sampling steps, not the best looking image. Again, this is where I was saying a dog riding a dolphin doesn't always work. Find a dog on top of a dolphin in the ocean. The nice thing about Stable Diffusion is just how fast it is. Like, this is so much faster. Now I'm on an A100, which is basically the fastest machine you can get, but it's definitely faster than any of the other tools. Like, even if I was on a T4, it'd be a lot faster than anything else out there. Now you'll see, it's maybe because I said a dot. I don't know what a dot is. Yeah. So I did find this model in general really struggles with a dog on top of a dolphin. Just maybe it's a conceptual problem or something else. But you can see here that like you've got a lot of tools. And for this week, maybe you want to just spin this up and run it and maybe play with the different sampling methods. Play with the different options here, like batch count or batch size. Play with some of these various different sequences. So we'll cover this a lot more. I'll cover more of this starting next week, because we'll definitely talk a little bit more about text prompts, but then I'll also talk a little bit more about Stable Diffusion in particular. But in general, this is a really cool tool. And if you want to play around outside the scope of this class, you can look into things like image to image or training. We'll cover this more in future classes. But if you're really interested in sort of playing around and seeing what else is available within this tool, I find this tool is super powerful and really interesting. So that's where we're going to spend the rest of this class sort of using this particular GUI, because it'll give us a lot of options. So again, if we want to turn this off and don't want to be charged anymore, A dog sitting on top of a dolphin in the ocean. Sitting. Maybe sitting is my phrase that I'm missing. Let's see. Let's try this. Yeah, I did get kind of a hybrid. Interesting. Okay, so if you want to turn this off, obviously you can't really turn it off from here. So what you'll do is you just close out this tab. You don't even need to close out this tab, but it's fine if you do. Then you'll go back to your Colab notebook and make sure that to turn off your Colab notebook, you go to manage sessions and terminate. Now, one thing I should note is the automatic GUI does not have, I don't think it has drive capability. I don't think it's saving the drive, or I don't think it's saving your images to drive. Let me double check that. I might be wrong. Oh, wow, it is saving your images to drive. Awesome, even better. So where is that saving to?
Stable diffusion, maybe folder? Is that where it is? Let's see.
Looks like it, yeah. So if you go to SD, there's a folder in your drive called SD and then stable diffusion, and then outputs text image. So one thing to know is if you have a small drive, like if you're using the free drive account, that I think only has like 100 gigabytes or something, you can probably pretty easily fill that up. So make sure you're coming out here and cleaning this stuff out pretty frequently. Sorry, I meant to come here to terminate. I would just sort of say, like, because this stuff is saving to drive, you don't need to worry about saving your images before you hit terminate. Whereas with other Colab tools, you do need to make sure you're saving your images before then. So go ahead and hit terminate. And we'll make sure our machine is off. All right. So homework between now and next week is just like play with some models, make some funny, weird images and share them on. So whether you use Huggingface, Replicate, or Colab, just go through, like, again, I'll share the slides after class. So if you want to dig through some of those examples I have there, if you want to open up the Colab notebooks, like, please feel free, find other Colab notebooks and see what you can make. We'll start digging into the web GUI stuff a little bit more next week, as well as how to write better text prompts. So we'll look at some tools that allow us to do that. As a reminder, it will definitely not be a live class next week on Monday at 7:30. I'll post a poll in our Slack channel probably tomorrow morning, just to sort of gauge what people want to do as a makeup class, whether it's a recording or another or different date. And we'll figure out what the best solution is for that. But we'll definitely not be meeting next week because I will be on a train with very doubtfully like no Wi-Fi. So yeah. Any questions before we call it an evening?
Yeah, just with the Colab, so you'll just sort of run those code boxes again every time you want to sort of start up with it again, and it'll create a new URL. Is that the case?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll give you a new URL and with like a different code. Like the names are always funny. You'll just always open up that new URL in a new tab.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, but you won't have to deal with the downloading the model or anything like that because it's already there. So that takes up that's that whole hassle is gone. So yeah, it's easy.
Yeah, it should be faster the second time you run it because it'll be a little bit less to download and things. It still will be a little bit of a process. I mentioned there was a link in the Slack channel that if an M1 Mac, or even if you do have a Windows, there are ways to run this stuff locally. They're a little hit or miss, and I've heard that like installation is a little bit frustrating. I might try to go through the M1 install this week and just sort of see how it goes. Because I know like this stuff does get pretty costly as we run it. So we can try and see if a local install works for us. And I'll let people know if that works for me, and then I'll record a video or something for that for folks that want to do it. But I think not everyone has an M1 Mac, not everyone has a Windows with a NVIDIA GPU. So like we'll always plan on using Colab. We'll start it up every day before we start class. Any other questions? All right, I will hit everyone up over Slack when this recording is finished, completing and uploading to YouTube, and also post a poll for how we want to manage next week's class. So keep an eye out for that. Please do try to respond as soon as you can, just so I can prep ahead of that. And yeah, look forward to seeing what sort of weird images you make in all of our various tools. All right, thanks so much, everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Thanks.
Yeah, happy Halloween. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.